You don't belong in first class." Those 6 words would echo through Diana Coleman's mind for the rest of her life, but not for the reasons the airline employee intended. What started as the most humiliating night of her career would become the hour that changed everything. Have you ever been judged by your appearance before anyone bothered to learn your story? What happened next proves that sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of justice, and revenge served cold can be the sweetest dish of all. 8 hours earlier, Diana sat in the 42nd floor conference room of the Meridian Capitol building in downtown Denver, her hands steady as she signed the final documents that would make her the owner of Aerotech Industries. The pen felt heavier than usual in her fingers, not because of nerves, but because of the magnitude of what she was accomplishing. $2.8 billion. 25 years of building her investment empire, and now, at 50 years old, she had just acquired one of the largest aviation companies in the United States. The winter sun cast long shadows across the mahogany table as her legal team shuffled through the paperwork. David Chen, her attorney for the past decade, smiled as he closed the final folder. The deal was done. Aerotech Industries, with its vast portfolio of aviation assets, including cargo operations, aircraft leasing maintenance facilities, and multiple airline subsidiaries, now belonged to Diana Coleman. She leaned back in her leather chair, allowing herself a moment to savor the victory. The room smelled of expensive coffee and success. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Denver stretched out below her like a kingdom she had conquered through sheer determination and brilliant financial strategy. But her mind wasn't on the view or the celebration her team was planning. Her thoughts were on Chicago, on home, on her 16-year-old daughter Emma, who was waiting for her to keep a promise. The acquisition had been months in the making, involving dozens of subsidiaries, hundreds of aircraft, and thousands of employees scattered across the aviation industry. The paperwork alone had filled 3 boxes with subsidiary details that would take weeks to fully digest. Diana had focused on the big picture during negotiations, market share revenue streams, strategic positioning. The individual airline brands were just line items in a massive portfolio, important but not immediately relevant to her evening plans. Diana had grown up in the South Side of Chicago, where dreams were luxuries most families couldn't afford. Her mother cleaned offices at night to pay for Diana's education, working 2 jobs, so her daughter could have opportunities she never had. Every late night, every missed dinner, every sacrifice had led to this moment. Diana had built Meridian Capital from nothing, turning a small investment firm into a powerhouse that moved markets and changed industries. The conference room was silent, except for the soft rustle of papers and the distant hum of traffic 42 floors below. Diana's reflection in the polished table surface showed a woman who had aged gracefully under the pressure of building an empire. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant twist that framed her face, and her tailored black suit spoke of quiet confidence rather than flashy wealth. She had learned early in her career that in rooms full of powerful white men, she needed to be twice as prepared, twice as smart, and twice as professional just to be considered equal. But success came with a price. The past 2 New Year's Eves, Diana had been traveling for business while Emma celebrated alone with the housekeeper. This year would be different. This year she would be home before midnight, sitting on their couch in Lincoln Park, watching the ball drop on television while sharing hot chocolate and planning their spring vacation to Italy that they had been discussing for months. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mom, are you really going to make it home tonight? I have champagne ready." Well, apple cider, champagne, but still. Sarah and Marcus are coming over around 10:30, and we're going to pretend we're sophisticated New Yorkers who stay up late on purpose. Diana smiled, her heart warming despite the cold December air outside. She typed back quickly. "Absolutely, sweetheart. Flight leaves at 9:30. I'll be home before you know it, and I want to hear all about your plans for the new year." The truth was, Diana could have stayed in Denver for the celebration. Aerotech's executives had invited her to an exclusive party at the Brown Palace Hotel, where the city's elite would gather to welcome the new year. The invitation had been extended with the kind of respect reserved for billionaires, complete with offers of private transportation and premium accommodations. But she had learned something over the years that many successful people never figured out wealth meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. Family trumped business every single time. She gathered her things methodically, placing the signed contracts into her leather briefcase alongside her laptop and the small framed photo of Emma that traveled with her everywhere. The photo had been taken the previous summer during their vacation to Martha's Vineyard, showing Emma laughing on the beach with the kind of carefree joy that reminded Diana why she had fought so hard to create a life of opportunities for her daughter. The elevator ride down to the lobby gave Diana a few moments to reflect on the day's achievement. Aerotech Industries was more than just another acquisition. It represented the culmination of a strategy she had been developing for years. The aviation industry was on the verge of major changes with new technologies and shifting consumer preferences, creating opportunities for companies willing to innovate. By purchasing Aerotech, Diana had positioned herself at the center of that transformation. But the complexity of the deal meant that individual subsidiary details had been handled by her team of analysts and lawyers. Diana knew she owned multiple airlines now, but the specific brands, routes, and operations were buried in documentation she planned to review during the holiday break. Tonight was about Emma, not business details. The lobby of the Meridian building was all glass and steel, modern and imposing. Her reflection in the polished marble floors showed a woman who had earned every victory through intelligence, determination, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. Diana had never been one for ostentation. She preferred to let her work speak for itself, to build wealth quietly and strategically, rather than flaunting her success in ways that made others uncomfortable. The revolving door deposited her onto the sidewalk, where her driver Miguel waited beside the black Mercedes sedan that served as her primary transportation. Miguel had been with her for 5 years, ever since she had decided that having a reliable driver was more valuable than the independence of driving herself through Denver's increasingly congested streets. He was a quiet man in his 50s, originally from Guatemala, who had put 3 children through college on the salary Diana paid him. "Good evening, Ms. Coleman," Miguel said, opening the rear door with a slight bow. "How did the meeting go? You look like someone who just conquered the world." "Very well, Miguel. We're now in the aviation business in a big way. Diana replied, settling into the familiar comfort of the sedan's leather interior. Miguel's eyes lit up with genuine pleasure. "Congratulations, ma'am. Your mother would be very proud. She always said you'd change entire industries someday." The comment hit Diana unexpectedly hard. Her mother had passed away 5 years earlier after a long battle with cancer, but not before seeing her daughter become one of the most successful businesswomen in America. During her final weeks, they had talked extensively about the balance between ambition and family, between changing the world and being present for the people you love. Her mother had been proud of Diana's success, but worried about the cost. "You remember what she used to say about promises to family?" Miguel continued glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Some things matter more than business." Diana nodded, feeling the weight of tonight's importance settling over her like a comfortable blanket. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Money can buy you many things, baby girl, but it can't buy back the moments you miss with people you love. Don't let success cost you your family." The drive to Denver International Airport took 30 minutes through light traffic. Most people were already where they wanted to be for New Year's Eve, settled in with family or friends, preparing for celebrations that would mark the transition from one year to the next. Diana watched the city pass by through the tinted windows, thinking about how different her life had become from the one she had imagined as a child growing up on the south side of Chicago. Back then, success had seemed impossible, a dream reserved for other people in other worlds. But her mother had insisted that education could change everything, that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle. Diana had believed her, throwing herself into her studies with the intensity of someone who understood that excellence was not optional. She had earned scholarships to Northwestern University and then Harvard Business School, graduating at the top of her class both times before joining Goldman Sachs as an investment banker. But Wall Street had been a challenge unlike anything she had experienced before. The casual racism and sexism that permeated the industry in the 1990s had been shocking even to someone who had grown up facing discrimination. Diana had endured comments about affirmative action assumptions about her qualifications and social exclusion that made it clear she would never truly belong in that world. She had lasted 3 years before deciding to start her own firm, using her savings and a small loan from her mother to establish Meridian Capital in a rented office above a restaurant in Chicago's Loop. The early years had been brutal. Diana had worked 18-hour days making cold calls and analyzing potential investments while building relationships with clients who were often surprised to discover that the brilliant financial mind they had been corresponding with belonged to a young black woman. She had learned to navigate conference calls where she was the only person of color, board meetings where her presence was questioned, and social events where she was either ignored or treated as a curiosity. But persistence had paid off. Diana had developed a reputation for identifying undervalued companies and turning them into profitable enterprises. Her success rate had attracted investors willing to overlook their prejudices in favor of returns on their investments. By the time Emma was born, Meridian Capital was managing over $1 billion in assets, and Diana had established herself as one of the most respected voices in the investment community. The airport appeared on the horizon, its distinctive white, tent-like peaks rising against the darkening sky. Denver International Airport was one of the busiest in the world, a sprawling complex that served as a hub for travelers heading across the American West and beyond. On New Year's Eve, It would be particularly crowded, with people trying to reach their destinations before the holiday weekend ended regular schedules. As they pulled up to the departure area, Miguel turned around with a gentle smile. "Have a safe flight, Ms. Coleman. Give Emma my regards and don't forget to enjoy being a mother tonight instead of a CEO." "Thank you, Miguel. You're absolutely right. See you next week." Diana gathered her briefcase and small carry-on bag, stepping out into the cold December air. The temperature had dropped significantly since morning, and she could see her breath in small puffs as she walked toward the entrance. The automatic doors opened with a whoosh, revealing the bustling interior of one of America's busiest airports. The airport was busier than Diana expected for 9 o'clock on New Year's Eve. Families hurried past with rolling suitcases, business travelers checked phones, while walking briskly toward security couples held hands as they navigated the crowds toward their gates. There was an energy in the air, the anticipation that comes with the end of one year and the promise of another, mixed with the underlying tension that always accompanied air travel during peak periods. Diana had flown thousands of miles in her career, accumulating enough frequent flyer points to maintain elite status on multiple airlines. But tonight felt different. Tonight was about going home, about keeping promises, about being the mother she sometimes struggled to be, while building an empire that would provide Emma with opportunities Diana herself had never imagined. She approached the electronic check-in kiosk, scanning her driver's license, and watching as the system pulled up her reservation. The screen displayed her flight details clearly. Skylink Airways Flight 447 to Chicago O'Hare, departing from Gate B47 at 9:30 p.m. First class seat 2A. The seat had cost more than many people earned in a month, but Diana had learned that comfort during travel was an investment in her ability to be productive and present when she reached her destination. As she collected her boarding pass from the printer, Diana glanced at the airline logo without really processing it. Her mind was focused on Emma, on the promise she had made, on the celebration waiting for her at home. The blue and silver design was just another corporate brand in the endless parade of companies that filled the modern travel experience. She folded the boarding pass carefully and slipped it into her coat pocket, where she could feel its edges through the fabric as she headed toward security. The security checkpoint was efficiently managed despite the holiday crowd. Diana moved through the TSA pre-check line, grateful for the expedited process that her frequent travel had earned her. The security officer who checked her identification was professional and courteous, scanning her driver's license and boarding pass with the routine efficiency of someone who processed thousands of documents each day. "Have a good flight, ma'am," the officer said with a genuine smile. "Safe travels to Chicago." "Thank you," Diana replied, appreciating the simple human kindness that made travel more pleasant. Once through security, Diana found herself in the main terminal with time to spare before boarding. The concourse was decorated for the holidays with silver and gold streamers hanging from the ceiling and a large Christmas tree still twinkling near the main information desk. Holiday music played softly in the background, competing with arrival and departure announcements, and the general cacophony of people trying to reach their destinations. She bought a coffee from a small cafe near her gate, something to keep her alert for the short flight home. The barista, a young man with tired eyes who was clearly working through the holiday, smiled when Diana handed him a $20 bill and told him to keep the change. Small acts of kindness felt particularly important during times when so many people were stressed about travel and separation from family. "Thank you so much," the barista said, his gratitude genuine. You just made my night. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you too. I hope you get to celebrate with your family soon. Diana settled into a chair near gate B447, pulling out her phone to check emails one last time before switching to airplane mode. The Aerotech acquisition would make headlines tomorrow, but tonight she was just another passenger trying to get home. She scrolled through congratulatory messages from colleagues and partners, each one reminding her of the magnitude of what she had accomplished. But as she sat there, coffee warming her hands, something felt off. She couldn't put her finger on it at first. Maybe it was the way some passengers seemed to be staring at her more than usual. Maybe it was a general unease that came with being in crowded spaces during politically tense times. Or maybe it was just the general weariness that came with being a black woman in corporate America, always having to prove herself, always having to be twice as good to get half the recognition. Diana had learned to trust her instincts over the years. They had served her well in business, helping her spot opportunities others missed and avoid deals that looked good on paper but felt wrong in her gut. Her ability to read people and situations had been crucial to her success, allowing her to navigate complex negotiations and build relationships with investors who might otherwise have been skeptical of a young black woman claiming she could generate superior returns. Tonight, something felt wrong, but she couldn't identify the source. The airport seemed normal, the crowd typical for New Year's Eve, the staff professional and efficient. Yet there was an undercurrent of tension that Diana couldn't shake, a feeling that the evening was not going to unfold as smoothly as she had planned. She checked her watch, 8:45 p.m. Boarding would begin in 30 minutes. She thought about calling Emma again, but decided to wait until she was on the plane. Her daughter was probably getting ready for the small party she was hosting for a few close friends. The kind of low-key celebration Diana had specifically requested. Nothing too wild. Nothing that would worry a mother who was flying home through winter weather. The coffee was bitter, but warm, and Diana found herself watching the other passengers waiting for flight 447. Most appeared to be heading home for New Year's Eve, judging by their casual clothes and relaxed demeanor. A few business travelers tapped on laptops trying to squeeze in last-minute work before the holiday weekend. An elderly couple shared a sandwich while looking at photos on their phone. A young mother tried to keep her toddler entertained with a picture book. Normal people living normal lives, Diana thought. Sometimes she envied that simplicity, the ability to exist without constantly being scrutinized, questioned, or doubted. But she had chosen this path, had fought for every opportunity, had earned her place at tables where people looked surprised to see her. The weight of representation was heavy sometimes, knowing that her success or failure would be attributed not just to her individual merits, but to her entire race and gender. The gate area gradually filled with passengers as departure time approached. Diana observed the familiar ritual of air travel people, checking their phones, organizing their belongings, purchasing last-minute snacks from nearby vendors. She noticed a family with 3 young children struggling to keep everyone organized, and remembered her own single mother struggles when Emma was small. Those had been difficult years trying to build a business while raising a child, but they had also been some of the most meaningful of her life. At 9:00 p.m., the gate agent made the first announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin boarding Skylink Airways Flight 447 to Chicago in just a few moments. Please have your boarding passes and identification ready." Diana finished her coffee and gathered her things methodically. Her carry-on bag contained a change of clothes for tomorrow morning and some documents she wanted to review during the holiday break. The signed Aerotech contracts were secure in her briefcase, representing the most significant business achievement of her career. But tonight, business took a back seat to family. The boarding pass was in her coat pocket, and she could feel its edges through the fabric as she stood and moved toward the gate area. This was it. In 2 hours, she would be home. In 3 hours, she would be sitting on her couch with Emma counting down the final minutes of the year. The thought filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee, and everything to do with the prospect of keeping her promise. But as Diana approached the gate, she noticed the agent watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't hostility, exactly, but it wasn't the neutral professionalism she expected either. There was something calculating in the woman's eyes, something that made Diana's instincts trickle with warning. The agent's name tag read Rebecca Matthews. She was young, maybe 25, with blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun and the kind of practiced smile that came from customer service training. But the smile didn't reach her eyes, and when she looked at Diana, there was a flicker of something that made Diana's chest tighten with a familiar dread. She told herself she was being paranoid. It had been a long day, an emotional day, and she was probably reading too much into innocent interactions. But as she took her place in the boarding line, Diana couldn't shake the feeling that this flight home was going to be more complicated than she had anticipated. The boarding pass felt different in her hand now, less like a ticket home, and more like a challenge yet to be faced. Diana's intention was beautifully simple. Get home to her daughter before midnight on New Year's Eve. After 25 years of building an empire, after missing countless family moments for board meetings and business trips, after sacrificing personal time on the altar of professional success, she wanted nothing more than to be a mother sitting on a couch with her child when the clock struck 12. The promise had been made 3 months earlier during one of those rare, quiet Sunday mornings when Diana allowed herself to sleep past 6 a.m. Emma had padded into her mother's bedroom wearing an oversized University of Chicago t-shirt, her natural hair still messy from sleep, carrying 2 cups of coffee that she had learned to make exactly the way her mother preferred. She had climbed into bed beside Diana, something she hadn't done since she was much younger, and they had spent a few precious minutes in comfortable silence, watching the sunrise paint their Lincoln Park neighborhood in shades of gold and amber. "Mom," Emma had said eventually, her voice soft, but serious. "I know your work is important. I know you're changing the world and breaking barriers and all that stuff that makes me proud to tell people you're my mother. I understand why you miss things sometimes, but could you maybe change the world a little less on New Year's Eve this year?" The question had hit Diana like a physical blow. She remembered being 16 herself, how desperately she had wanted her own mother's attention during the times that mattered. Her mother had worked nights cleaning office buildings, coming home exhausted when Diana was already asleep for school, leaving again before Diana woke up. They had been ships passing in the night for most of Diana's teenage years, both of them fighting for a better future, but rarely able to share the present. Her mother had missed Diana's high school graduation because she was working a double shift that would pay for Diana's college textbooks. She had missed Diana's college graduation because she couldn't afford the time off or the travel to Cambridge. She had missed Diana's wedding because she was in the hospital with pneumonia, brought on by years of exhaustion and inadequate health care. Diana understood the sacrifices, respected them, but she also remembered the loneliness of celebrating milestones without the person whose love and support meant the most. "I'll be home," Diana had promised, pulling Emma closer and breathing in the familiar scent of her daughter's shampoo. "Whatever deal is on the table, whatever meeting needs to happen, whatever crisis emerges at the last minute, I'll be home for New Year's Eve. We'll make hot chocolate with those fancy marshmallows you like, and watch the ball drop and talk about our plans for the new year." Emma had smiled, then the kind of radiant expression that reminded Diana why nothing else mattered as much as this relationship. Really, even if someone offers you a chance to buy Apple or Google or something, even then, Diana had laughed. Though let's hope it doesn't come to that. They had spent the rest of that Sunday morning planning their celebration, deciding on snacks and movies and the guest list for Emma's small party with friends. It would be low-key, but meaningful, the kind of memory that lasted a lifetime and created the foundation for the kind of relationship Diana wanted to have with her daughter as she grew into adulthood. The promise had become something sacred between them, referenced in text messages and phone calls throughout the busy fall season. When Diana had been invited to speak at a conference in London during the last week of December, Emma had simply texted a photo of their calendar with New Year's Eve circled in red marker. When a potential acquisition opportunity had emerged that would require travel during the holidays, Diana had declined to pursue it, telling her team that family commitments took precedence during that specific window. Now, standing in the boarding line at Denver International Airport, Diana felt the weight of that promise like a physical presence in her chest. The Aerotech deal had been structured specifically to close on December 30th, so she could honor her commitment to Emma. She had turned down 3 other major opportunities that would have required travel during the holiday week. She had restructured meetings, rescheduled calls, and moved mountains to make sure she would be on this flight, heading home, to keep the most important promise of her professional life. Her phone buzzed with another text from Emma. "Just finished decorating the living room with Sarah. We found Mom's old college photos in the closet and made a timeline of your evolution into world domination. Marcus is bringing his guitar, and we're going to write a song about how cool it is to have a CEO mom who actually shows up when it matters. Can't wait for you to get home. Did you bring the documents I can look at tomorrow? I want to understand what you bought." Diana smiled, despite her growing unease about the atmosphere at the gate. Emma's excitement was infectious, her joy at the prospect of sharing this tradition making Diana's determination even stronger. Her daughter had always been interested in Diana's business ventures, asking intelligent questions about market strategies and financial structures that impressed Diana's colleagues when Emma occasionally joined business dinners or office visits. Emma was considering studying business in college, following in her mother's footsteps, while hopefully avoiding some of the obstacles that Diana had faced. The idea of Emma following her into the business world filled Diana with both pride and concern. Pride because her daughter possessed the intelligence and drive to succeed in any field she chose. Concern because Diana knew firsthand the additional challenges that awaited young black women in corporate America, the subtle and not-so-subtle barriers that could slow or derail even the most promising careers. But Emma would have advantages that Diana had never possessed: financial security, family connections, and the confidence that came from growing up knowing that success was possible. Emma would enter rooms knowing she belonged there, armed with examples of achievement and the unwavering support of a mother who had already broken through barriers and proven that excellence could overcome prejudice. She thought about her own mother, who had passed away 5 years earlier after a long battle with cancer that had been complicated by decades of inadequate health care and financial stress. In her final weeks, they had talked extensively about the balance between ambition and family, between changing the world and being present for the people you love. Her mother had been proud of Diana's success, but worried about the cost to her relationship with Emma. "Don't let the empire you're building become the walls that keep you from the people who matter," her mother had said during one of their last conversations, her voice weakened by chemotherapy, but still carrying the wisdom that had guided Diana through childhood. "Money and power can accomplish amazing things, but they can't replace the time you spend with Emma. Those moments don't come back, baby girl. They don't come back." Diana had taken those words to heart, making subtle but meaningful changes in how she structured her business and personal life. She hired more capable lieutenants, delegated more responsibility, and protected family time like it was sacred. She had started saying no to evening meetings that conflicted with Emma's school events, declining weekend business trips that would interfere with their traditional Saturday morning breakfasts, and establishing clear boundaries between her role as CEO and her role as mother. The promise to be home for New Year's Eve was part of that commitment, a line in the sand that she refused to let work cross. It represented more than just being present for a celebration. It symbolized her determination to prioritize the relationship that mattered most, to prove that love and family could coexist with professional ambition and financial success. Standing in the airport terminal, watching other families hurry toward their gates with the urgent energy of people trying to reach their destinations before midnight, Diana felt a deep sense of purpose that went beyond business success. She had conquered industries and accumulated wealth that most people could only dream of, but her most important job was being Emma's mother. Tonight was about honoring that role, about showing up when it mattered, about proving that love and presence trumped every professional obligation. The boarding announcement crackled over the intercom. "We are now beginning pre-boarding for passengers needing special assistance, active military personnel, and our premium members." Diana checked her boarding pass again, running her thumb over the printed details. First class seat 2A. She had earned this level of travel through years of business trips and airline loyalty, but tonight it felt particularly appropriate. She was flying home as the new owner of a major aviation company, one of the most powerful women in American business. But her real destination was her daughter's embrace and a shared moment of hope for the year ahead. Emma represented everything Diana had fought for throughout her career. Not just financial security or professional achievement, but the ability to give her daughter choices that Diana herself had never had. Emma could study art or medicine or business or anything else that sparked her interest, knowing that her mother's success had created a foundation of opportunity that would support whatever path she chose. But more than that, Emma would grow up knowing that her mother had found a way to be both powerful and present, both ambitious and loving. The intention was pure and powerful: be home by midnight. Keep the promise. Show Emma that some commitments were unbreakable no matter what obstacles appeared or what pressures emerged from the business world. Diana had built her career on meeting goals and overcoming challenges, but this goal felt different. This was about being human, rather than being successful about connection, rather than conquest about the kind of success that couldn't be measured in dollars or market share. As the line began to move forward for boarding, Diana felt a surge of anticipation mixed with determination. In less than 2 hours, she would be walking through her front door in Lincoln Park. She would hang up her coat, kick off her heels, and transform from CEO to mom in the time it took to walk from the foyer to the living room. They would make hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, laugh about Emma's friends' attempts to stay awake until midnight, and count down the final seconds of the year together, while making wishes for the 12 months ahead. The boarding pass in her pocket represented more than just a seat on an airplane. It was a ticket to fulfilling the promise that mattered more than any business deal, more than any acquisition, more than any professional achievement. It was her chance to prove that success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with, that all the money and power in the world couldn't replace the simple joy of being present for the people you love. Diana's simple intention would soon collide with forces beyond her control, testing not just her commitment to Emma, but everything she believed about justice, dignity, and the power of standing up for what was right. But in this moment, standing in line with hope in her heart and determination in her spirit, she believed that keeping her promise was just a matter of getting on the plane and flying home. She had no way of knowing that the next hour would challenge everything she thought she understood about respect, prejudice, and the price of being successful while Black in America. The first hint that something was fundamentally wrong came at exactly 9:15 p.m. when Diana approached Gate B47 for boarding. Rebecca Matthews, the gate agent, looked up from her computer screen with an expression that Diana immediately recognized from decades of navigating corporate America. It wasn't the neutral professionalism she expected from airline staff, nor was it the warm efficiency that first-class passengers typically received. Instead, there was something calculating in Rebecca's gaze, the kind of skeptical assessment that Diana had learned to anticipate and deflect in boardrooms across the country. "Good evening," Rebecca said, her voice carrying the practiced cheerfulness of customer service training, but underneath it lay something that made Diana's instincts prickle. "Boarding pass and identification, please." Diana handed over her documents with the automatic efficiency of someone who had made this exchange thousands of times before. She was accustomed to the routine of air travel, the brief verification of identity and ticket validity that preceded boarding. But as Rebecca examined the documents, Diana noticed something unusual. The gate agent's eyes moved from the boarding pass to Diana's driver's license and back again multiple times, as if checking for discrepancies that couldn't possibly exist. Other passengers in the first-class boarding line moved through the process quickly, their documents barely glanced at before being returned with a smile and a pleasant wish for a good flight. A white businessman ahead of Diana had his boarding pass scanned without the agent even looking at his ID. An elderly white couple behind him received warm smiles and helpful directions to the aircraft door. But Rebecca held Diana's documents longer than necessary, studying them with the kind of attention typically reserved for suspicious circumstances or problematic passengers. "Is there something I can help you with?" Diana asked, her voice calm, but tinged with the kind of professional authority that usually resolved minor misunderstandings quickly. "Oh, no problem at all," Rebecca replied, but her tone suggested otherwise. Her fingers tapped nervously on the counter as she continued to stare at the boarding pass. "I just want to make sure everything is in order. You're traveling to Chicago tonight." "That's correct," Diana confirmed, beginning to feel the first stirrings of unease. The question seemed unnecessarily repetitive, since the destination was clearly printed on the boarding pass Rebecca had been studying so intently. Rebecca tapped something into her computer. Her brow furrowed in concentration that seemed excessive for a routine boarding verification. The delay was subtle, but noticeable long enough to make the passengers behind Diana shift impatiently in line. Diana had flown millions of miles in her career and had never experienced this level of scrutiny during boarding. She told herself it was probably a new employee being extra cautious, or perhaps a computer glitch that required additional verification. But there were other signs that suggested this was about more than technical difficulties. Rebecca's body language had changed since Diana approached the counter. Her shoulders were tense, her movements slightly jerky, and she kept glancing at her supervisor, who was stationed at a nearby desk. Most tellingly, she avoided direct eye contact with Diana, instead focusing on the computer screen or the documents in her hands. A middle-aged black man in the business class line caught Diana's eye and gave her a subtle nod of recognition and solidarity. He had clearly witnessed this type of interaction before and understood what was happening. His expression carried the weary frustration of someone who had learned to expect such treatment while hoping it might someday change. "Thank you for your patience, Ms. Coleman," Rebecca said finally, emphasizing Diana's name, as if testing how it sounded or confirming something she had suspected. She handed back the documents, but her smile seemed forced, the kind of expression that came from customer service training rather than genuine warmth. "Please proceed to the gate." Diana took her documents and moved toward the boarding area, but the uncomfortable feeling in her chest intensified. She had learned to trust her instincts in business, and those same instincts were now telling her that something was fundamentally wrong with this situation. The professional in her wanted to dismiss the concern as paranoia brought on by a long day and the stress of closing a major deal. But the black woman who had navigated corporate America for 2 decades knew better than to ignore warning signs. As she walked toward the jet bridge entrance, Diana couldn't shake the feeling that Rebecca's behavior was about more than routine verification procedures. There had been something in the gate agent's eyes, a kind of skepticism, that seemed to question Diana's right to be in the first-class boarding line. It was a look Diana had encountered before in various forms, the subtle doubt of hotel clerks when she checked into luxury suites, the surprise of restaurant hostesses when she requested tables in premium sections, the barely concealed astonishment of retail employees when she made expensive purchases without checking price tags. The feeling was familiar and unwelcome, a reminder that no amount of success or wealth could completely shield her from the assumptions and prejudices that still shaped how some people saw her. Diana had hoped that such encounters would become less frequent as she gained prominence in the business world. But experience had taught her that discrimination often became more subtle, rather than disappearing entirely. The boarding process revealed the next layer of the problem with a clarity that was impossible to ignore. As Diana waited in the jet bridge with other first-class passengers, she noticed Kyle Harrison, a tall male flight attendant with sandy brown hair and a confident bearing, watching her with obvious suspicion. He was positioned at the aircraft entrance, checking boarding passes as passengers entered the cabin, a routine procedure that typically took seconds per person and involved little more than a quick glance to verify seat assignments. But when Diana reached Kyle's position, his entire demeanor changed in a way that was both subtle and unmistakable. His relaxed posture stiffened, his casual smile disappeared, and he held up his hand to stop Diana's forward movement with a gesture that seemed unnecessarily forceful. "Excuse me, ma'am," Kyle said, his voice carrying a tone of authority that hadn't been present when he greeted the previous passengers. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Diana handed over the document for what felt like the third time in 10 minutes, watching as Kyle examined it with the same excessive attention that Rebecca had shown at the gate. He held the pass up to the overhead light as if checking for forgery, then compared it to a passenger manifest displayed on his tablet. The examination was thorough and obviously intentional, designed to be seen by other passengers and to create an impression of irregularity. Other first-class passengers continued to move past them without similar scrutiny, their boarding passes barely glanced at before they were welcomed aboard with professional courtesy. The contrast was stark and deliberate, creating a bottleneck that drew unwanted attention to Diana's situation and made her feel like a suspect rather than a customer. "There seems to be some confusion about your seat assignment," Kyle said, his voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear clearly. The statement was delivered as fact rather than question, carrying an implication that Diana was somehow responsible for the alleged confusion. "Are you sure you're supposed to be in first class?" The question hit Diana like a physical blow, but she maintained her composure with the skill that had served her well in countless challenging business situations. The implication was crystal clear. Someone who looked like her couldn't possibly afford or deserve a first-class seat. The assumption was based solely on her appearance, on the color of her skin, and perhaps the fact that she didn't fit whatever image Kyle Harrison had in his mind of a typical first-class passenger. "I'm absolutely certain," Diana replied, her voice controlled but firm, despite the anger building inside her. She had learned over the years that maintaining composure in such situations was crucial, that any sign of emotion would be used to justify the treatment she was receiving. "I purchased this ticket myself 3 weeks ago, and I've been flying first class with various airlines for over 15 years. My frequent flyer status is platinum level." A woman behind Diana, in line, an older white passenger with gray hair and a kind face, spoke up with quiet indignation. "Excuse me, but this is ridiculous. I watched this lady go through the same examination at the gate, and now you're questioning her again. This is completely inappropriate." Kyle's expression showed surprise at being challenged by another passenger. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but we have security protocols to follow. I'm just doing my job." "No," the woman replied firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "You're harassing a paying customer for no legitimate reason. I've been flying for 40 years and I've never seen anything like this." A younger black woman behind them pulled out her phone and began recording. "This is definitely going on social media," she said clearly. "People need to see how this airline treats passengers." Kyle's expression suggested he didn't believe Diana's explanations, despite the fact that her frequent flyer status was clearly indicated in the airline's computer systems and should have been visible to any employee checking her records. He continued to study the boarding pass, as if it were a complex document requiring interpretation, making a show of his confusion that seemed designed to humiliate rather than resolve any genuine concerns. "Well, I'll need to verify this with my supervisor," Kyle said finally, his tone suggesting that Diana was personally responsible for creating an inconvenience. "Could you please step aside while I sort this out?" The request was presented as a polite suggestion, but the tone made it clear that it was actually a command. Diana found herself moved to the side of the jet bridge, while other passengers continued boarding smoothly, their curious glances making her feel like a criminal who had been caught attempting some kind of fraud. She watched as business travelers and families passed by, none of them subjected to the same level of scrutiny, despite carrying boarding passes that were identical in format to her own. "I have the confirmation email on my phone," Diana offered, pulling out her device and navigating to her email app. "And my credit card statement showing the purchase along with my frequent flyer account information that confirms my status with this airline." Kyle barely glanced at the evidence she was offering, dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "That won't be necessary right now," he said, though the information would have immediately resolved any legitimate questions about her ticket validity. "Let me just check with my supervisor about the seating arrangement." The elderly woman who had spoken up earlier moved closer to Diana. "I'm Margaret Patterson," she said quietly. "I'm an attorney, and what you're experiencing is clearly discriminatory. Would you like me to document what's happening here?" "I appreciate that," Diana replied, grateful for the unexpected support. "This is definitely not normal procedure." Margaret nodded grimly. "I've been traveling for business for 4 decades, and I've never seen a passenger treated this way. The fact that they're questioning your boarding pass for the 3rd time while everyone else passes through without inspection is textbook discrimination." The delay stretched on each minute, feeling like an hour, as Diana stood in the cramped jet bridge, while other passengers filed past her into the aircraft. She could hear conversations and laughter from inside the first-class cabin, the sounds of people settling in for their flight home, while she remained trapped in this bureaucratic nightmare. The boarding pass in her hand, which had started the evening as a symbol of her journey home to Emma, now felt like evidence in a trial she hadn't realized she was facing. Several passengers turned to stare, as they passed, some with curiosity, and others with the kind of expression that suggested they assumed she must have done something wrong to warrant this treatment. But others looked at her with recognition and sympathy, understanding that they were witnessing something deeply wrong. A young Hispanic man paused as he passed. "This is messed up," he said directly to Kyle. "You should be ashamed of yourself." Kyle's face reddened, but he maintained his authoritative stance. "Sir, please proceed to your seat. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns anyone who believes in basic human decency," the man replied, before continuing into the aircraft. When Kyle finally allowed Diana to board the aircraft after a 20-minute delay that had no legitimate explanation, she felt a moment of relief that proved to be devastatingly premature. She located seat 2A in the first-class cabin, noting the comfortable leather chair and extra legroom that she had paid premium prices to enjoy. She stowed her carry-on bag in the overhead compartment with practiced efficiency and settled into her seat, pulling out her phone to text Emma about the slight delay. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe that the boarding difficulties had been some kind of misunderstanding, an unfortunate but minor obstacle in her journey home that was now resolved. The cabin around her filled with the quiet conversations of other first-class passengers, the rustle of newspapers and magazines, and the soft sounds of flight attendants preparing for departure. Margaret Patterson had taken the seat across the aisle and gave Diana an encouraging smile. "The worst part should be over now," she said softly. "Once you're seated, they usually leave you alone." But Margaret's optimism proved to be misplaced. Jennifer Walsh, the lead flight attendant, approached Diana's seat with a determined expression that immediately put Diana on high alert. Jennifer was an older woman, perhaps 55, with graying blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun, and the kind of practiced bearing that came from years of airline experience. But there was something in her eyes that reminded Diana unpleasantly of the expressions she had seen from Rebecca and Kyle. "Excuse me, ma'am," Jennifer said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that brooked no argument. The tone was professional, but cold, lacking any of the warmth that Diana had observed in Jennifer's interactions with other passengers. "I'm going to need you to move to another seat." Diana looked up from her phone, where she had been typing a message to Emma about her expected arrival time. The request was so unexpected that it took her a moment to process what she was hearing. "I'm sorry, there's been a mix-up with the seating assignments," Jennifer explained, though she offered no details about the nature of this alleged mix-up. "This particular seat has been reserved for another passenger, and we're going to need you to relocate to the economy section." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Diana felt the eyes of every passenger in the first-class cabin turn toward her, their conversations stopping as they witnessed this unexpected drama. A businessman across the aisle looked up from his laptop with undisguised curiosity. Margaret Patterson's expression showed shock and outrage. A few people began pulling out their phones, and Diana realized with horror that her humiliation was likely being recorded for social media consumption. "I purchased this seat specifically," Diana said, her voice calm but audible to nearby passengers who were now listening with obvious interest. She pulled out her phone and navigated to her email confirmation. "I have my boarding pass right here, and I can show you my confirmation email and receipt that clearly indicate Seat 2A. Jennifer barely glanced at the offered documentation, dismissing it with the kind of casual disregard that suggested Diana's evidence was irrelevant to whatever decision had already been made. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but we have protocols to follow. The passenger who was originally assigned to this seat has a medical condition that requires this specific location, and we need to accommodate their needs according to federal regulations." The explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, but Diana immediately noticed several problems with it. First Seat 2A was not designated as an accessible seat for passengers with disabilities. Those seats were typically located in specific rows with removable armrests and additional space. Second, the flight manifest showed several empty seats in first class, meaning alternative accommodations should have been available for any passenger with special needs. Third, no legitimate airline would forcibly relocate a paying first-class passenger to economy without significant compensation unless there were truly extraordinary circumstances. Margaret Patterson's voice cut through the tension with legal precision. "Excuse me, flight attendant. I'm an attorney and I need to point out that what you're describing doesn't match federal accessibility requirements. Accessible seating has specific designations, and this isn't one of them. Additionally, involuntary passenger relocation requires specific documentation and compensation procedures that you haven't mentioned." And Jennifer's expression hardened at being challenged by another passenger. "Ma'am, I appreciate your interest, but this is an airline matter, and I'm not required to discuss the details of other passengers' medical information with you." "You're right," Margaret replied firmly. "But you are required to follow federal regulations regarding passenger rights and non-discrimination. What you're doing here appears to violate both." A younger passenger in the row behind them spoke up. "I've been recording this whole interaction, and it's clearly discriminatory. This is going straight to social media and the Department of Transportation." Several other passengers murmured their agreement, creating a groundswell of opposition that Jennifer clearly hadn't expected. The cabin atmosphere had shifted from curious observation to active support for Diana, with multiple witnesses documenting what was obviously inappropriate treatment. "Who is this other passenger?" Diana asked, her voice remaining level despite the fury building inside her. "And why wasn't this seating issue resolved before boarding began? Shouldn't any special accommodations have been arranged in advance?" Jennifer's expression grew even more hostile at being questioned about her explanation. "Ma'am, I'm not going to argue with you about our policies and procedures. Patient privacy laws prevent me from discussing other passengers' medical information. You need to gather your belongings and move to your new seat assignment. We have a schedule to keep, and you're delaying the flight for everyone else." The accusation that she was personally responsible for delaying the flight was particularly galling, considering that she had been seated and ready for departure until Jennifer had approached her with this unexpected demand. Diana looked around the cabin and noticed that other passengers were indeed becoming restless, but their frustration was clearly directed at the airline staff rather than at her. "This is absolutely ridiculous," said a man in the front row. "I fly this route every week for business, and I've never seen anything like this. You're harassing this woman for no legitimate reason." A woman near the window called out, "Where's the passenger with the medical condition? If this seat is so critical for their needs, where are they?" Jennifer's face reddened as she realized she had lost control of the narrative. The cabin full of passengers was now clearly on Diana's side, creating a public relations nightmare for the airline. But instead of backing down, she doubled down on her authority. "I'd like to speak to the captain." Diana said, her voice steady despite the humiliation she was experiencing. "This situation doesn't seem to be handled according to standard airline procedures, and I believe there may be discrimination involved in how I'm being treated." The word discrimination seemed to galvanize Jennifer's response in the worst possible way. "The captain is busy with flight preparations and cannot be disturbed," she replied sharply. "Either you move voluntarily to the seat we've assigned you, or we'll have to call airport security to assist with your relocation." The threat hung in the air like a weapon. Diana realized that she was facing a nightmare scenario where refusing to comply would result in her being branded as an unruly passenger, but complying would validate clearly discriminatory behavior. The choice was between submitting to injustice or being forcibly removed from the aircraft, and either option would result in missing her flight home to Emma. The cabin erupted in outraged voices as passengers realized the flight attendant was threatening to have Diana arrested for refusing to give up a seat she had rightfully purchased. This was no longer just about one woman's travel experience. It had become a public demonstration of institutional discrimination witnessed by dozens of people who would never forget what they had seen. The security officers who boarded the aircraft 30 minutes later moved with the kind of professional efficiency that suggested this was a routine call for them. Diana watched from her seat as Officer Martinez, a middle-aged Hispanic man with kind eyes but firm bearing, entered the first-class cabin, followed by his partner, a younger officer whose name tag read Thompson. They surveyed the situation with the alert stance of law enforcement officers who had been called to resolve a disturbance, though Diana knew she had done nothing to warrant their presence beyond refusing to accept discriminatory treatment. The cabin had grown tense during the wait for security, with passengers expressing their outrage through increasingly vocal complaints about the airline's behavior. Several people had started recording videos on their phones, creating a documentary record of events that would soon spread across social media. Margaret Patterson had been taking detailed notes and photographs, building a case for what was clearly discriminatory treatment. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said, approaching her seat with respectful but authoritative demeanor. "We've been asked to escort you off the aircraft. The airline staff has indicated that you're refusing to comply with crew instructions, which is a federal offense. Please gather your belongings and come with us." Diana felt the weight of every eye in the first-class cabin pressing down on her like a physical force. Phones were definitely recording now, capturing her moment of ultimate humiliation for posterity and future viral social media posts. She thought about Emma waiting for her in Chicago, about the promise she had made about the hot chocolate they would never share if this nightmare continued to escalate. "Officer, I'm a paying passenger with a valid ticket and assigned seat," Diana said, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent cabin. "I've done nothing wrong except attempt to occupy the seat I purchased legally and in good faith. I'm being removed from this aircraft because of racial discrimination, not because of any behavior on my part." Martinez nodded sympathetically, and Diana could see in his eyes that he understood the situation better than he could officially acknowledge. "I understand your position, ma'am, but the airline staff has requested your removal, and federal regulations require us to comply with crew instructions regarding passenger safety and aircraft operations. We can sort this out once we're off the aircraft." "No," Margaret Patterson said, standing up with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard in courtrooms. "This is discrimination pure and simple. I've been documenting everything, and this woman has done absolutely nothing to warrant removal from this aircraft. The airline staff created this situation out of prejudice, and you're being used to enforce their discriminatory actions." Several other passengers stood up in support, their voices creating a chorus of opposition that filled the cabin. "This is wrong," called out one man. "She paid for her seat," shouted a woman. "This is racism," declared another passenger. Officer Thompson, clearly uncomfortable with the growing resistance from the cabin full of witnesses, moved his hand closer to his belt, in a gesture that Diana recognized as an attempt to intimidate the situation back under control. "Ma'am, we need to go now," Thompson said, his youth making him less patient than his experienced partner. His tone carried an edge that suggested the conversation was over, whether Diana agreed or not. "This is discrimination," Diana said, addressing not just the officers, but the entire cabin full of passengers who were witnessing her treatment. She stood slowly, maintaining her dignity despite the circumstances. "I want everyone here to understand what they're seeing. I'm being removed from this aircraft because I'm a black woman sitting in first class, and the airline staff has decided that I don't belong here. This has nothing to do with safety or regulations, and everything to do with prejudice." A murmur ran through the cabin at her direct statement. The passengers' expressions ranged from outrage to sadness, to determination to document and share what they were witnessing. Margaret Patterson was frantically writing notes, while several others continued recording with their phones. "I'm posting this everywhere," declared the young woman behind Diana. "Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. People are going to see how this airline treats passengers." "I'm calling my attorney the minute we land," said the businessman across the aisle. "This is the most blatant discrimination I've ever witnessed." As Diana gathered her belongings with deliberate dignity, she felt the weight of representation on her shoulders pressing down like a physical burden. She was not just a woman being discriminated against. She was a black woman being discriminated against in full view of dozens of witnesses. Her treatment would have become part of the narrative about who belonged in first class and who did not would be used to justify future acts of discrimination against other passengers who didn't fit someone's narrow definition of appropriate. The walk down the aisle toward the aircraft door felt endless each step, taking her further from her goal of getting home to Emma, and further from her faith in the basic fairness of American institutions. Every face she passed seemed to judge her, though most expressions showed sympathy rather than suspicion. By the time she reached the aircraft door, Diana felt like she was leaving more than just an airplane. She was leaving behind her belief that success and dignity could protect her from the ugliest aspects of American society. Margaret Patterson followed her to the door of the aircraft. "I'm going to file a complaint with the Department of Transportation tonight," she said firmly. "I have your contact information from your boarding announcement, and I'll be calling you tomorrow to offer my services as a witness. What happened here tonight was completely illegal." "Thank you," Diana replied, genuinely grateful for the unexpected support from a stranger who had chosen to stand up for justice when it mattered most. The terminal at 10:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve felt like a tomb. Most flights had already departed, carrying families and travelers to their destinations for the holiday weekend, leaving behind empty gates and darkened shops. Diana stood near Gate B47, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as SkyLink Airways Flight 447 pushed back from the gate and taxied toward the runway for departure. The aircraft's lights blinked rhythmically in the darkness as it carried its passengers toward Chicago, toward home, toward the midnight celebrations she would now miss because of the color of her skin. Her phone buzzed insistently with a text from Emma. "Mom, where are you? Sarah and Marcus are here, and we're getting the hot chocolate ready with those expensive marshmallows you brought home last week. Flight tracker shows your plane should have landed already. The countdown show starts in an hour. Can't wait to see you." Diana stared at the message, her heart breaking with the weight of her failure to keep the most important promise of her daughter's young life. How could she explain to her 16-year-old daughter that she had been removed from an airplane because a group of airline employees had decided she didn't belong in first class? How could she justify breaking the promise that had meant everything to both of them? Because prejudice had triumphed over justice once again. She walked slowly to the customer service desk, hoping against hope that there might be another flight, another option, any way to still make it home before midnight and salvage some portion of their planned celebration. But the desk was closed for the night, its computer terminals dark and covered with plastic sheets. The waiting area empty except for a maintenance worker methodically emptying trash cans and preparing the space for the next day's operations. The next available flight to Chicago wouldn't depart until January 2nd, making it impossible to salvage her New Year's Eve plans with Emma. Diana had checked the flight schedules on her phone multiple times, hoping to find some option she had missed. But holiday travel schedules were notoriously limited, and most airlines reduced their operations significantly during the period between Christmas and New Year's Day. Diana found an empty chair in the deserted gate area and sat down heavily, the weight of defeat settling over her like a suffocating blanket. She was a billionaire CEO, one of the most powerful women in American business, owner of a vast financial empire, and she had been reduced to a stranded passenger in an empty airport terminal. The irony was not lost on her, but she didn't yet understand just how profound that irony truly was. The terminal felt surreal in its emptiness, like a post-apocalyptic movie set where all human life had mysteriously vanished. The shops were closed, their metal security gates pulled down and locked tight. The restaurants had turned off their lights and stacked chairs on tables, their employees long gone to their own New Year's Eve celebrations. Even the janitor, who had been emptying trash, had disappeared into the service corridors, leaving Diana alone with the echo of her footsteps and the hum of the heating system struggling against the winter cold, seeping through the building's windows. She tried calling the airline's customer service number, navigating through an automated system that seemed designed to discourage rather than help callers. After 20 minutes on hold, listening to the same cheerful recorded message about how much the airline valued her business, an automated system informed her that all representatives were busy assisting other customers and suggested she try calling back during normal business hours. The suggestion felt like a final insult. Even the company's customer service had abandoned her on one of the busiest travel nights of the year. Diana's phone buzzed again with another message from Emma. "Mom, is everything okay? Your flight tracker shows arrived, but you're not answering. Sarah's mom is asking if she should pick you up from O'Hare. We have champagne chilling and the countdown special queued up on TV. Marcus wrote a song called CEO Mom Comes Home, and we can't wait to play it for you. Are you stuck in traffic?" Diana stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, as she struggled to find words that could possibly explain what had happened without destroying her daughter's faith in fairness and justice. How do you tell your child that you've failed to keep the most important promise of her young life? How do you explain that despite all your success, all your power, all your determination to create a better world for the next generation, you're still vulnerable to the same prejudices that have plagued your people for centuries? She typed and deleted several responses before settling on something that felt like a lie wrapped in hope. Flight delayed due to mechanical issues. Still trying to get home. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. We'll call you soon with more information. The response came immediately. It's okay, Mom. We'll wait for you. Sarah and Marcus are helping me reorganize the living room so we can stay up later if needed. Don't worry about us. Just get home safe. I know you're doing everything you can. But Diana knew it wasn't okay, and the understanding that her daughter was trying to protect her feelings while having her own heart broken made the situation even more unbearable. Emma's friends would eventually go home. The hot chocolate would get cold and be thrown away. The midnight moment would pass without the mother-daughter celebration they had planned so carefully. The promise would be broken, and no amount of money or power could repair the damage to their relationship or to Diana's faith in her ability to protect the people she loved from a world that still judged them by the color of their skin. Sitting in the empty terminal, surrounded by the detritus of a travel day gone catastrophically wrong, Diana felt the full weight of her isolation pressing down on her like a physical burden. She was successful beyond most people's wildest dreams, but success couldn't shield her from humiliation. She was wealthy enough to buy entire airlines, but wealth couldn't guarantee her a seat on one of their flights. She was powerful enough to move markets and influence government policy, but power couldn't move the hearts of people determined to see her as less than human. In her frustration, Diana pulled out the crumpled boarding pass and stared at it more closely than she had all evening. The paper was wrinkled now from being clutched during moments of stress and humiliation. She smoothed it out against her knee, studying the details with the kind of attention she typically reserved for important business documents. Skylink Airways. The logo suddenly seemed familiar in a way that made her stomach drop. Blue and silver design with a stylized wing pattern. She had seen this logo before recently in documents and presentations. Her heart began to race as the memory crystallized into horrifying clarity. Diana's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and opened the Aerotech acquisition documents that David Chen had emailed her after the signing ceremony. She scrolled through the detailed listing of subsidiaries, her breath catching in her throat as she found what she was looking for. Skylink Airways, operating 47 aircraft across 23 states, serving over 2 million passengers annually, generating over $800 million in annual revenue. The same airline whose employees had just discriminated against her was now legally and completely under her control. The boarding pass that had started the evening as a symbol of her journey home now lay in her hands like evidence of the most expensive hour of her life. Not expensive in terms of money lost, but expensive in terms of the price that 3 airline employees were about to pay for their prejudices. Diana Coleman had just discovered that she didn't just own an aviation company. She owned the specific airline that had humiliated her, and she was about to teach them a lesson about the true cost of discrimination. Diana sat in the uncomfortable terminal chair staring at the boarding pass with a mixture of disbelief and growing realization that felt like lightning striking twice in the same place. The paper felt different now, heavier somehow, as if it carried the weight of cosmic justice finally catching up with institutional prejudice. Skylink Airways Flight 447 to Chicago, Gate B47, Seat 2A. The details that had once represented hope and homecoming now represented something far more powerful: accountability. The blue and silver logo that she had glanced at casually while thinking about Emma and family promises now blazed in her memory like a neon sign. She had seen this exact design hundreds of times over the past 6 months, printed on documents displayed in PowerPoint presentations included in the massive portfolio of assets that comprised Aerotech Industries. How had she missed it? The answer was simple. Her mind had been focused on family, on keeping promises, on being a mother instead of a CEO. The very priorities that had made her vulnerable to discrimination were also what had prevented her from recognizing her position of power. Diana's breath caught in her throat as the full implications settled over her. Rebecca Matthews, Kyle Harrison, and Jennifer Walsh had just humiliated their new owner. They had removed the CEO of their parent company from an aircraft because their prejudices prevented them from seeing beyond the color of her skin. They had treated a billionaire like a criminal because they assumed she didn't belong in first class, never imagining that she owned every seat on every plane in their entire fleet. But this wasn't just about personal vindication or even justice for herself. Diana thought about all the other passengers who had experienced similar treatment from these same employees, all the people who hadn't had the resources to fight back, all the humiliation that had been inflicted without consequences. Margaret Patterson had mentioned seeing this type of behavior during her decades of business travel. The young woman recording on her phone had seemed unsurprised by what she was witnessing. How many others had been victimized by this culture of discrimination? Diana felt a surge of power that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with justice finally having its moment. This wasn't about revenge or personal vindication. It was about accountability and ensuring that no other passenger would experience what she had just endured. This was about using her position to create change, to transform a moment of devastating discrimination into a teaching moment for an entire industry. She pulled out her phone with hands that were no longer trembling, but steady with purpose. The hour of reckoning had arrived. Diana's first call was to David Chen, her attorney, and the one person who could help her navigate the legal and procedural complexities of what she was about to do. She needed to act quickly and decisively, but also carefully and legally. The phone rang twice before David's voice appeared thick with sleep, but immediately alert with concern when he heard Diana's voice. "Diana, what's wrong? You should be in Chicago by now." "David, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." Diana said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I was just removed from a Skylink Airways flight due to blatant, undeniable racial discrimination. Complete discrimination witnessed by dozens of passengers who recorded the entire incident on their phones." There was a pause as David processed the information, and Diana could almost hear his legal mind beginning to analyze the implications. "Skylink Airways, Diana. That's one of AeroTech's subsidiaries. You literally own that airline as of this afternoon. Are you telling me that employees of your own company just discriminated against you?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Diana replied grimly. And David, this wasn't subtle. This was blatant, systematic discrimination from gate agent to flight attendant to crew chief. I have names, physical descriptions, witness testimony, and video evidence. I need you to initiate an emergency review of the employees involved immediately." David's voice sharpened with professional focus and barely contained outrage on her behalf. "I'll conference in Sarah Martinez from AeroTech's legal department and James Wilson from Human Resources immediately." "Diana, what specific actions do you want to authorize tonight?" Diana's voice carried the steel edge that her business adversaries had learned to recognize and fear. "Immediate termination for gross misconduct and discriminatory behavior that violates federal civil rights laws, company policy, and basic human decency. I want security footage pulled from the gate area and aircraft interior. I want witness statements collected from passengers who recorded the incident. And I want a complete review of training protocols and company policies regarding passenger treatment implemented across all subsidiaries." The conference call expanded quickly as David brought in the AeroTech executives who had been celebrating the acquisition at a hotel bar in downtown Denver just hours earlier. Within minutes, Diana had Sarah Martinez, the company's chief legal counsel, and James Wilson, the head of human resources, on the line. Their shock at learning what had happened was palpable through the phone speakers, their voices carrying the kind of professional urgency that came from understanding the full implications of the situation. "Ms. Coleman," Sarah said, her voice tight with legal concern and personal outrage. "What you're describing constitutes clear violations of federal civil rights laws, multiple company policies, and basic standards of human decency. We need to act immediately to address this situation and prevent any similar incidents from occurring. The potential liability alone could be enormous. But more importantly, this behavior is completely unacceptable, regardless of legal consequences." James Wilson's voice carried the weight of someone who understood the broader implications for corporate culture and public relations. "This isn't just about individual employee misconduct, though that's serious enough. If our staff feel empowered to treat passengers this way, we have an organizational culture problem that requires immediate and comprehensive correction. We're looking at potential federal investigations, massive lawsuits, and devastating damage to our reputation that could take years to repair." Diana felt a grim satisfaction as the corporate machinery began to move with the efficiency that came from having unlimited resources and urgent motivation. I want the complete employment files of Rebecca Matthews, Kyle Harrison, and Jennifer Walsh on my phone in 20 minutes. I want airport security to locate and detain them before they leave the premises tonight. And I want emergency meetings scheduled with all Skylink management first thing tomorrow morning to address the cultural issues that allowed this to happen. The speed at which a corporate resources could move when properly motivated was remarkable. Within 15 minutes of her initial call, Diana had a team of 12 people working on various aspects of the situation, pulling employment records, reviewing security footage, locating the employees involved, and preparing legal documentation for immediate termination proceedings. Sarah Martinez called back first with preliminary legal findings. Diana, we've reviewed the video footage from airport security cameras and initial employment records. This is even worse than we initially thought. Rebecca Matthews has been with Skylink for 8 months and has 3 formal complaints in her file for inappropriate treatment of passengers, all involving customers of color. Every incident was documented, but no meaningful discipline was implemented. Diana felt her jaw clench as the pattern became unmistakably clear. What about the others? Kyle Harrison has been employed for 2 years with 2 documented incidents of similar discriminatory behavior, including one that resulted in a passenger complaint to the Department of Transportation that was settled quietly by the company. Jennifer Walsh has 5 years with the company and 7 documented incidents of discriminatory conduct, including 2 that resulted in passenger complaints to federal authorities. The information hit Diana like a physical blow. These weren't isolated incidents or momentary lapses in judgment brought on by stress or misunderstanding. These were employees with documented histories of discriminatory behavior who had been allowed to continue treating passengers badly because no one with sufficient authority had demanded accountability or implemented consequences for their actions. So the company has known about this pattern of behavior and done nothing meaningful to stop it. That's exactly right, Sarah confirmed grimly. There's a clear pattern of discriminatory conduct that has been documented but not addressed. We've found evidence of at least 15 similar incidents involving these 3 employees over the past 2 years, with complaints ranging from verbal harassment to physical intimidation to exactly the type of treatment you experienced tonight. James Wilson's voice joined the call with employment records and immediate actions. Diana, all 3 employees have been immediately terminated for gross misconduct violation of federal civil rights laws and multiple breaches of company policy. Airport security has confiscated their company credentials, revoked their access to all facilities, and escorted them from airport property. We've also initiated a comprehensive review of all complaints involving these employees over the past 5 years to identify other potential victims who may wish to pursue legal action. Diana listened to the rapid-fire corporate response with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The justice was swift and appropriate, demonstrating the power that came with ownership and unlimited resources, but it couldn't undo the humiliation she had experienced or restore the evening she had lost with Emma. The employees who had treated her with such contempt were now facing the consequences of their actions, but their victims remained victimized, and the damage to trust and dignity couldn't be easily repaired. What about the passengers who witnessed everything several people were recording and offered to serve as witnesses? We're reaching out to them through airport security and gate records, Sarah replied. Margaret Patterson, the attorney who spoke up for you, has already contacted our legal department and provided a detailed statement. She's also put us in touch with several other passengers who recorded the incident and are willing to testify if necessary. The documentation is overwhelming and completely supports your account of what happened." Diana felt a surge of gratitude for the strangers who had chosen to stand up for justice when it mattered most. Their courage in speaking out had not only provided crucial evidence, but had also prevented the airline from dismissing her experience as an isolated misunderstanding. At 11:30 p.m., Diana made one final call to complete the circle of accountability and provide herself with the closure needed to move forward. She dialed the direct line for Robert Hendricks, the Denver International Airport duty manager, a number that was typically reserved for emergency situations and high-priority corporate communications. The phone was answered on the second ring by a tired-sounding man, whose voice immediately became more alert when he learned who was calling. "Mr. Hendricks, this is Diana Coleman, CEO, and owner of Meridian Capital." Diana said, her voice carrying the authority that came from controlling billions of dollars in assets. "As of this afternoon, my company owns Aerotech Industries and all its subsidiaries, including Skylink Airways. I need your immediate assistance with a matter of urgent corporate importance." There was a pause as Hendricks processed this information, and Diana could hear him shifting from routine night shift supervision to high-alert customer service mode. "Yes, ma'am. How can I assist you tonight?" "1 hour ago, 3 employees of my airline engaged in blatant racial discrimination against a passenger, removing her from an aircraft for no reason other than their personal prejudices and failure to recognize her right to equal treatment," Diana explained with clinical precision. "That passenger was me. Those employees have now been terminated, but I need your assistance with completing my journey home to my family." "Of course, Ms. Coleman. Whatever you need," Hendricks replied, his voice now carrying the urgent efficiency that came from understanding he was dealing with someone who could make or break careers with a single phone call. "I need immediate access to a company aircraft to complete my journey to Chicago. I believe Aerotech owns several private jets based at this airport that are available for executive transportation. I'd like to arrange departure within the next 30 minutes if possible." Hendricks's voice carried newfound respect and professional urgency. "Absolutely, ma'am. We have a Gulfstream G650 available for immediate departure with a fully qualified crew standing by. I can have the aircraft prepared for takeoff within 25 minutes, and I'll personally arrange ground transportation to bring you to the private aviation terminal. The executive car service can have you there in 5 minutes." Diana felt the first genuine smile of the evening cross her face as power and justice finally aligned in her favor. "Ground transportation will be perfect, Mr. Hendricks. And thank you for your professionalism and efficiency. This has been a very difficult evening, and your assistance means more than you know." As she hung up the phone, Diana looked down at the boarding pass still clutched in her hand. The piece of paper that had started the evening as a symbol of her journey home had become evidence of discrimination and humiliation, and would now serve as a permanent reminder that justice, while sometimes delayed, could still prevail when people had the courage and resources to demand accountability. The private jet that would take her home to Emma wasn't just transportation. It was proof that power, when wielded responsibly and decisively, could create accountability for those who abused their authority and deliver justice for those who had been wronged by prejudice and discrimination. Diana Coleman had started the evening as a passenger, hoping to get home to her daughter. She was ending it as an owner who had just learned the true cost and responsibility of the empire she had built, and the price that prejudice would pay when it chose the wrong target. The Gulfstream G650 lifted off from Denver International Airport At exactly 11:52 p.m., its powerful engines cutting through the winter air with the kind of authority that only unlimited resources and corporate ownership could provide. Diana sat in the leather captain's chair of the executive cabin, looking out at the lights of Colorado fading beneath her as she flew toward home, in an aircraft that now belonged to her company, carrying her away from the most humiliating and ultimately transformative night of her professional life. In her hand, she still held the boarding pass from Skylink Airways Flight 447, the piece of paper that had become so much more than a simple travel document. The paper was wrinkled, now creased and worn from being clutched during moments of humiliation and triumph, stained with the sweat of injustice and the satisfaction of accountability finally served. What had started as a ticket home had become a symbol of everything wrong with assumptions, prejudice, and the abuse of small power over vulnerable people. But it had also become something else entirely. Proof that dignity could be restored, that justice could prevail even when delayed, and that sometimes the universe had its own way of balancing scales that had been tilted by hatred and ignorance. The boarding pass would be framed and hung in her office, not as a trophy of vengeance, but as a reminder of responsibility and the power that came with true ownership. Diana's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mom, we saved you some hot chocolate in the thermos. Sarah and Marcus went home around midnight, but I'm still awake reading. I know you tried your best to get here. Are you going to make it home tonight?" Diana looked at her watch, 12:23 a.m. Central Time. She was officially late for their New Year's Eve celebration, but she was going to make it home. The Gulfstream would touch down at Chicago Executive Airport in 18 minutes, and a company car would have her home to Lincoln Park by 12:50 a.m. Late, but not too late for the embrace that mattered most. She typed back carefully, "Flying home now in a company plane. Very long story that I'll tell you tomorrow, but I'll be there soon. Save room on the couch for your mom. I kept my promise, just not the way either of us expected." The response was immediate. "Company plane." "Mom, what happened? Are you okay? Did you buy another airline or something?" Diana smiled, despite everything, imagining Emma's worried and curious face. "Something like that, sweetheart. I'm fine. Better than fine. And yes, I kept my promise. I'm coming home, and we have a lot to talk about tomorrow." When the Gulfstream touched down in Chicago, Diana felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with reaching her destination, and everything to do with understanding what the journey had taught her. She had learned that success without accountability was meaningless, that power without compassion was empty, and that justice delayed was not necessarily justice denied if you had the courage and resources to demand what was right. At 12:47 a.m., Diana's car pulled into her driveway in Lincoln Park. Emma was waiting at the front door in her University of Chicago sweatshirt and pajama pants, 2 mugs of reheated hot chocolate steaming in her hands, her face bright with relief and curiosity. "You made it," Emma said, her smile brighter than any New Year's celebration Diana could have imagined. "And you have that look that means you either bought something huge or fired someone important." "I kept my promise," Diana replied, taking her daughter in her arms and feeling the warmth that no amount of wealth could buy and no professional achievement could equal. "And tomorrow, I'm going to tell you about the most expensive hour of my life." The boarding pass in her coat pocket crinkled softly as she hugged Emma, a reminder that some lessons are worth every penny they cost, and some promises are worth moving heaven and earth to keep. Justice had been served, accountability had been delivered, and Diana Coleman was finally home where she belonged. If this story moved, you share it. Because respect shouldn't be earned through revealing your bank account or your job title. It should be given freely to every human being who walks through a door, sits in a seat, or simply exists in a space where they have every right to be. Dignity isn't a privilege to be granted by those in uniform or behind counters. It's a birthright that belongs to all of us. And sometimes it takes losing everything to discover you had the power to change everything all along.